Hey guys, hey, how y'all doing today? This is D Durrell with D Durrell Life Solutions. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming in today. I know it's been a while since I have created a video. I wanted to do a short video today to kind of talk about my experience with counseling Latin or Hispanic Americans. As you all know right now, there's a lot of controversy going on with the immigrant population, particularly those of Mexican descent and in South America uh, and Central America who are in this country and wanting to have the right to be American citizens, to work, take care of their families, and to live a better life. And so, what I would like to do is to kind of talk about a little bit of my experience with counseling Latin or Hispanic Americans. It's a very unique population in which there are some differences and some similarities as it relates to African Americans or the community in which I come from as a Black American or as an African or African American. I choose to use all three descriptions as it relates to myself. And so I want to establish first and foremost that in my upbringing, growing up in Louisiana, um, I didn't grow up around or have a lot of experience around the Latin American community. In Louisiana, pretty much it's majority white, probably about 67% white, about 32% black, and then 1% of everything else. Post Katrina, you saw a little bit more Hispanic people that saw some opportunities to move to southern Louisiana and work in various respects. But growing up in rural Louisiana, growing up in the way I did, I don't think I saw a Hispanic person until I was probably 10, 11 years old. And when I saw Hispanic Americans, I saw them in cities such as Baton Rouge or New Orleans when I would go visit family or go there on field trips from my early experience. Um, Even throughout high school, middle school, we only had a couple of Hispanic Americans that actually attended our school. We had one guy I remember in middle school and one other young lady who was of Hispanic descent in high school. So far and very few. I appreciated the fact that once I was able to branch off on my own and go to college, that I would had the opportunity, even though I went to an historically black college, I was able to see people of all different diverse background, races, and so forth, as far as within my own personal and professional development. So I want you to understand that in my training to become a therapist, particularly classes that I took, such as multicultural counseling, it highlighted cultural issues that every ethnic group has to endure and experience in this country. And when we talked about counseling or interacting with Hispanic Americans, no matter if they were from the Caribbean, South America, Central America, the main things that we talked about was related to immigration, was related to language and communication, cultural issues that may be different from American culture, um, dealing with issues of the fact that, communicating with family back home, uh, having the ability to travel back and forth, issues of immigration, issues as it relates to people being incarcerated. And this was in the early 2000s, late 90s at the time. And so, with that, we also looked at religious um, differences, religious, as far as the majority of a large percentage of Hispanic Americans being uh, Catholic and so forth. We talked about a lot of different things that involved that community. Fortunately, I had professors who actually worked in states such as Texas and California, and they talked about the experiences of counseling Hispanic Americans and the things that you would have to deal with. And one of the things they talked about is that a lot of Hispanic communities live quite actually live in black communities, or they live in communities that are adjacent to the black community. Now, at the time, Hispanic Americans were just the population increase allowed them to be um, the number one minority, replacing us, and we were going to be the number two um, minority based on population, based on population numbers and what changes in laws that would come into play. And so I didn't begin to counsel and provide therapeutic services until I moved to Texas um, in 2003, 2004, primarily with Hispanic Americans, and as far as providing counseling services. I would like to establish that in my overall interaction with Hispanic Americans uh, in any community, you have to be aware of how you facilitate therapy and be open as a therapist to not allow yourself to get caught up in transference and counter transference that can stem from cultural differences, cultural norms, cultural expectations. You have to be clinically aware of some of the cultural norms and rules and so on that go on within these communities that may be different from you. And as a therapist, it is incumbent upon you to be non-judgmental, to be empathetic, and to collaborate with them to reach certain behavioral goals and treatment goals as it relates to their own unique experience as a Latin or Hispanic person. One of the biggest things that would come up in that community, it was actually not immigration. Okay. One of the biggest things that I dealt with was issues as it relates to the Hispanic community not being open to therapeutic treatment and therapeutic activities. Uh, the religion aspects of things preventing people for being open to wanting psychiatric or mental health treatment. That was the biggest issue. There were instances in which immigration related issues did come up. I can primarily point out a situation in which I had a guy who was actually biracial. He was mixed, Hispanic and white. His dad was white and his mother was Hispanic. And he married a woman who was from Mexico. And there was some immigration related issues because she was not here legally. She was here illegally. Um, uh, Even though they got married and there was tons of paperwork and financial related things that were needed to be done, that he was going to have to spend a lot of money to keep her here. And then there were some issues as it relates to how he grew up, primarily under patriarchy of a white male. And even though his mom was Hispanic, he primarily grew up as a quote unquote white Hispanic, for lack that better of, and he seen himself as white, and he culturally seen himself as being white, and he had a hard time adjusting to the cultural functions of particularly first or second generation uh, Hispanics who were coming out of Mexico, and some of them were legally here, and some of them were illegally here. His wife was here illegally, and he struggled with the fact of if he should continue the marriage, knowing that he would have to invest so much money in keeping her here, and there was no guarantees to that. They had a lot of different functional issues as it relates to how they should function in the family, and also within that the family expectations of providing help if a family member can with no questions asked. That was a big part of the issues. Now there are other things that came up, but the biggest issue as a therapist that I dealt with was the fact that a lot of Hispanic Americans were not open to therapy, just as the African American community. There was some similarities with that, so I was pretty used to that. And they use a lot of religious related themes that contributed to that, and just also some overall cultural issues with that, and particularly if they were seeking those services to somebody that was not in the Hispanic community. Also, one of the biggest pitfalls that one would have to encompass is the fact that if you are not fluent in Spanish or know some Spanish and need an interpreter and things like that, it can have a effect on how effective the therapy is. Hispanic Americans, particularly those that are fluent in Spanish, are more open to seeking therapy or expressing themselves to people who can understand or who are bilingual. If, or even in the fact of you having an interpreter, you still see a disconnect. Okay, there's still somewhat level of a disconnect because there's a third party who's basically speaking Spanish to them in Spanish to communicate to me in English, and then when I'm speaking, they're speaking to them in Spanish. So I'm gonna be honest with you, participating in therapy with any person that there's an interpreter involved is not as effective as opposed to both people naturally understanding each other without the use of a third party. There is a bit of a delay, a disconnect. Not saying that therapy cannot be effective, but it's more natural, more fluid when both people can understand each other without the influence or without the interpretation of another person. It takes away from the natural, more genuine expression. It takes away from the connection, emotional connection of things. It takes away from how the therapist and the non-English speaking person can connect with one another therapeutically. And that's not the fault of anybody. That's just the fact that if you are a therapist and you're providing services to that community, you're more effective, particularly if they are bilingual or they are non-English speaking. It would benefit you to have some fluency. Not saying you have to be totally fluent and speak as well as they can in Spanish, but if you are fluid enough to communicate, it makes the therapeutic process a lot easier. Now, one of the reasons I chose to create this video is to kind of highlight my experience. And I've been counseling Hispanic Americans since 2004, 2005, for almost 20 years, I would say. And from a clinical perspective, from a clinical application, the training that I received can be effective and was effective in treating and helping people that had various mental health issues, relationship issues. The main hurdle is the fact of the communication aspect that can get away or can slow down the progress, particularly if there's a disconnect in the fluency and the continuity of words and responses between therapists and the client. So you have to be cognizant of that, particularly if you're a person like myself who is a non-Spanish speaking person. You may have to be aware that you may want to take that into consideration if you plan on treating people in that community. Learning some Spanish, and I've attempted to learn some as much as I can. I learned it, forget it, because I wasn't consistently treating that population, even though particularly when I worked and did contract work with the Department of Family Protective Services and other different agencies, where you're pretty much having to provide services to the community itself. You can't control who they're going to refer to, and you got to accept and treat these populations that are being referred to you to the best of your ability. Okay. Um, I counseled families. I counseled couples. I counseled individuals that had severe mental illness. I counseled in a wide array of different issues. I've had people who were Hispanic who saw themselves as being a Spaniard. Okay. I saw those that talked about the colorism that goes on within the Hispanic community. They talked about the sexism. They talked about the machoism. They talked about the domestic violence issues that are heavy within that community. As far as issues as it relates to economics. And I had issues of people who were illegal and they repetitively came back, and they would leave and go back to be deported, and then they would come back. The ongoing issues of financial related issues that came with that. These were some of the issues. Visiting home, having family living home, and you're in the States, investing in your family and sending money back home, and things of that sort, wanting to make a better life for yourself. And as a therapist, my job was to assist and help them reach behavioral goals, clinical goals. My job was not to tell anybody, because that's where it becomes personal. That's when it becomes where you are being biased, in which that is a no-no for a therapist, trying to tell them, well, you shouldn't come here illegally. You should. This is your land. You talk about the history of Mexico, Spain, Mexico, Texas as an independent country before it became a state. My job is not to get into the legalities of things. My job is not to get into what is right and wrong. My job is to provide a therapeutic environment where they feel safe to communicate with themselves and to deal exclusively with mental health related issues or experiences that affect their mental health. And then in that, they could make decisions on whether or not they should be coming here illegally or not. Okay. There were some issues, guys. I just want to also establish there were some issues within that community, in which particularly those Hispanics who lived in black communities or that lived adjacent to black communities, where there were some racism did come up. There were some issues actually, particularly 2 years ago, I was counseling a Latin American female who I almost ended the therapeutic relationship because of her use of the N-word. And in some Hispanic communities, the use of the N-word is quite prominent. And it's acceptable to those particular African Americans who have an affinity for Latin Americans and think they're, because they live in the same hood per se, and have the same experience, same social economical background. They're no different from me. So what? So within the Hispanic community, those are the types of issues that have to be dealt with. Um, I can only empathize with the therapists now who are in California that are having to deal with issues as it relates to people who are dealing with a loss of family, deaths, dealing with drug related issues, dealing with all types of things that affect that community, just like any other community. Right now, things are at an elevated level, particularly in the state of California, and not only in that state, but all the different states where there's a large percentage of Hispanic populations, particularly those that are in Central America, from Mexico on down, that have come to this country illegally, and not only affecting the people who are coming here illegally, but also those who are here legally having to deal with the fact they have family members, friends, etc., who are struggling with their path to citizenship. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit today to kind of give my perspective as a therapist, providing, as far as my experience, counseling and providing therapy related services for the Latin or Hispanic community. If you have any questions for me as it relates to my experience with this population, or if you are a Hispanic American that have questions as it relates to me treating this population as a Black man, feel free to leave your comments in the comment section. And I'm more than happy to provide whatever information and answer whatever questions that you would like. With that being said, guys, this is D. Durrell with D. Durrell Life Solutions. Have a great day.